CCCQ.
Hello and welcome back to CQ, the AWS Certification Quiz Show. So today I've got a very special guest with me and very good friend of mine, John Rodenstein. John, tell us a bit more about what you do at AWS.
Thank you. So I've been a technical trainer at AWS, and these days I'm creating hands-on labs. And one thing we like to say at AWS is the best way to learn AWS is not just by reading a book, it's by actually using the service. And our hands-on labs give people lots of practice in how to use various services. And they can find them online, just search for AWS hands-on labs and have a play.
So you ready to be our guest expert today, John?
Ooh, let's see what you have in store for me.
So today we will be looking at the AWS Certified SysOps Administrator exam, okay, associate level. So speaking to those of you particularly in system administrator roles. So today we will be using the official study guide from our friends at wiley.com, also available at amazon.com. John, are you ready for us today?
Ooh, well, you ask the questions, I will provide the answers.
So we're going to start today, everyone, with a bit of a warm-up question, okay? So to make sure our poll is working. So for those of you wanting to join along, please do. If you could please type in the number that is what the initials AWS stand for.
So
nice,
I
easy
think
one
this is
to
an easy
start
question
with.
for them. So the idea of this show is we want you to vote along with us and to say what you think the right answer is to these questions. And to see if that's working, just type a number in the chat and hit enter, and it will appear up in the poll.
Just up there.
There we are. Oh, we have some votes coming in. I think they're getting the right answer for these questions.
Awesome.
So throughout the show, continue to vote in there. Just type the number along with me.
And if you do have any questions for John or myself as you're watching along, please feel free to pop them in the chat.
Yep.
Okie doke. All right, let's start with our first official question of today, John. Question 1 is on security. An application running on an Amazon EC2 instance wishes to make a call to an AWS API. What is the most secure way to provide AWS credentials to the application?
Ooh, okay.
One answer today, John. For all the questions today, we're just looking for one answer.
Just one answer. So when you call an AWS API, you need to provide credentials to say who you are and which account you belong to. And I know that you do that with an access key and a secret key. So I like all of these answers which mention access key and secret key, but there's a few of them, so let's have a look at them. Number 1, create an IAM user, put the access key, secret key into the application code.
Sounds a bit risky to me.
Indeed it is. Like, this will work. This will work.
Okay.
But the question says, what's the most secure way?
Yeah,
this is not secure.
absolutely.
The reason being, I have seen the case where people put the credentials in their code, they check their code into a source code repository like GitHub, suddenly it's available to the whole world, and people steal their credentials and do naughty things in their account. So this is not a secure method. Number 2, same thing, but put them into an application configuration file. Slightly better, because you're not putting in the code itself, you're putting in a config file, but again, that config file could be checked into somewhere and get out. So it's more secure, but not great.
Just a quick check on the poll. We're flicking between 1 and 4 at the minute, John.
Ooh, so they don't agree with number 2, that's good. Number 3, put them in a credentials file with AWS configure. So this is the correct way to put credentials into a local credentials file. The AWS command line interface, or CLI, you can type AWS configure and it stores the credentials in a file, but it can suffer from exactly the same thing with the earlier one, in that the credentials can get out of hand. So although I like access key and secret key, I don't like those answers. What's number 4? Assign an IAM role to the instance.
It's the one that stood out to me, John.
Well, you're quite wise in that respect, because if you're running software on an EC2 instance, you can create an IAM role with the necessary permissions, assign it to the instance, and the magic of EC2 will create temporary credentials that provides it to the application. The application doesn't have to store it anywhere, it actually gets assigned directly.
Okay.
So I'm liking number 4, and it looks like our online viewers are also liking number 4. What was the answer?
Number 4. Well done, us. All right, moving on to question 2. The AWS CloudTrail service provides which of the following, John?
Ooh, CloudTrail. Well, before I look at the questions, I sometimes say to myself, hey, what is probably going to be the answer? And that makes it a bit easy to look at things. So I'm not looking at the answers. I know that
And that's a bit of a general tip you use when... in the exam room, John?
I like to have a think. So often a question will say things like, what's the cheapest? And then I look at pricing type things. So yeah, have a think of it before you look at the answers.
Okay.
Is a good
tip.
Yep. So I know that CloudTrail tracks API requests. So it's sort of an audit trail. So if we look at these questions, these answers, number one, log API requests. I like this one. Let's keep going. Number two, information about IP traffic going to and from network interfaces. In fact, this is a different service. Does anyone out there in Twitchland know what the answer is here for number two, what service that is? What service tracks information going in and out of a network? It's something called a VPC flow log. So that is not CloudTrail. Number three, monitoring of utilization of AWS resources. Do you know which service monitors things in your AWS account?
CloudWatch?
CloudWatch, correct. It watches your account to see what's going on. So 3 is an excellent answer for CloudWatch.
Clue is often in the name of our product or service, right, John?
The names are pretty good. CloudTrail, Audit Trail, for example. Number 4, information on configuration changes to AWS resources within your account. I like your tip that the name often clues, because this one is based on a service called AWS Config. Now, CloudTrail and Config are sister services.
Okay.
Config keeps track of values at particular points in time. So what was the server on yesterday? Was the server on now?
Yep.
What was the IP address yesterday? What was the IP address now? CloudTrail keeps track of the API requests that say, please turn on this server, please turn off this server, please change the IP address. So I'm going for number 1. Most people have gone for number 1. And
50%. Number 1 is John.
Very
fantastic.
Good. So that's CloudTrail.
Just quickly checking, we've got no questions coming through at the minute, so shall we go on to question 3?
If you have questions, just put them up in the chat. Happy to answer.
Awesome. Question number 3. You need to create an Amazon EC2 instance with the fastest possible boot time. What combination would provide us the best solution?
Okay, boot time, startup time. I want my machine. So this is quite common when you have auto-scaling. Suddenly, lots of people hitting your services.
Auto-scaling, John?
Auto-scaling is the ability to automatically launch and terminate services based upon demand. So if at lunchtime lots of people hit your system, you need more machines. At night you can turn them off. At lunchtime, when you have to turn on more machines, you want them running as fast as possible. So this is quite a relevant question.
Okay.
So if I look at the answers, now using a bit of exam technique, I can see that 1 and 2 is very similar to 3 and 4. They're asking instant store or EBS.
Yep.
And they're either asking with user data or without user data. EBS, Elastic Block Store, we mentioned before, is the disk storage for your EC2 instance. So, okay, so the first question is user data versus no user data. Is it 1 and 2 or is it 3 and 4? And user data is a script that runs when your machine turns on. It can install software and configure everything on there to make it the server that you want. But it can slow things down. Yeah. So I know that just looking at those two, I want the fastest boot time, so I'm going to choose the answers with no user data. So it's 3 and 4.
Yeah, got it.
So my AMI can either be instant store backed or EBS backed. Instant store backed, we did mention before, it's the temporary disk, which could be very fast, or EBS is the persistent disk storage. It might sound like instant store is fastest, but I know a fact. And I know the fact that if you boot a machine off an AMI, an Amazon Machine Image, then in Instant Store, it has to copy that whole disk image across to Instant Store before the machine can start. Whereas EBS is very clever. It only copies across the blocks that it needs as it needs it. So booting off an EBS-backed AMI is fastest. It's fastest with no user data, so I'm going for number 4. And quite a few people have voted for number 3. It is 4. Okay, so Instant Store can be faster, but knowing that fact about EBS is quite useful.
Key to that question, it would seem. Thanks for voting along, everyone, as we go. Really good to see a bit more interaction. Let's move on to question 4. And this one's on storage, John. So you have a relational database that is running on a Windows Amazon EC2 instance. What would be the best choice for storage?
Okay. So my first thing that I think, mention Windows. Is Windows important here versus Linux instance? Well, we'll have a look at that. The best choice for a relational database. So a relational database, you typically want to have it running fast because the faster the disk, the faster the database. So let's have a look at these answers.
Okay.
Instant store volumes. So an instant store volume is a temporary disk volume directly attached to an EC2 instance. And if you get an SSD volume, it can run really, really fast.
Yeah.
So that's great, except for one tiny fact.
And what is that?
The tiny fact to know is an instance store disk volume being directly attached to an EC2 instance. If you stop the instance, you lose the contents of that disk.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's not very good for a database because presumably you want to keep your data in a database.
Okay.
Instance
So better
store,
for temporary.
Exactly. Install is great for temporary files, cached files, things that is not the only copy of your information. So I'm not going for number one. EBS, magnetic-based EBS storage. So this is a directly attached disk. In the old days, the only disk we had in the beginning was magnetic.
Yep.
We then came out with number 3, solid-state disks. So as we all know, in your computer, if you put an SSD disk, it goes lightning fast. So SSD is better than magnetic, so I'm not going for number 2.
Okay.
Number 4, elastic file system, EFS. So this is a network file system where you can attach one disk to multiple machines at the same time. It's great for sharing information between machines. However, it's not as fast as you can potentially get with EBS, but it's great for sharing. So in a database, you never want to share the disk files between machines. You just want to store the files on one machine, which is the database.
Okay.
And provisioned IOPS, it doesn't mention it here, but provisioned IOPS is a type of EBS disk volume where you can dial in the speed that you want in an EBS volume. So you can literally say, I want 10,000 IOs per second. And that is really great for a database, and therefore I'm favouring the answer of provisioned IOPS.
If we have a quick look at the poll, we've gone... People are favouring number 3, John,
I
SSD.
can fully understand that because everyone thinks SSD is really, really fast. Here's a little secret for you. Provisioned IOPS is SSD.
Okay.
It's a different way we provision it
Yep.
so you can turn up the speed. So everyone has said SSD, they're right. Was number 5 the correct answer?
Let's have a look, shall we?
Yes.
It's number 5.
So they're right, but 5 is even better than just SSD.
Perfect. Thank you, John.
We have a question. EFS is for Linux-based workloads. Oh, I like that. Thank you very much, FD God. Quite true. I mentioned before that the question mentioned Windows. You cannot use Amazon EFS with Windows machines, so that would have been a great way to immediately rule out that answer. We've recently introduced new file systems for Windows.
Okay.
Our FSX service for Windows. So thank you very much for pointing that out.
Thank you. Question number 5, moving on to networking. John, you ready?
Yep.
What statement is true about internet gateways?
So I know, before I look at the answers, an internet gateway connects a VPC to the internet.
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't connect an internet gateway to a VPC, it is guaranteed no way to reach it directly from the internet. So very good from a security point of view.
Okay.
So let's see what we've got here. For high availability, you should have one internet gateway per availability zone. You can have one internet gateway per VPC, but not per AZ. So I'm not liking that one because it's wrong. If it said VPC, it would be correct, but not per AZ. Internet gateways come with public IP addresses already assigned. This is interesting because an internet gateway is all about translating IP addresses. When you have an EC2 instance with a public IP address, the internet gateway manages that IP address for the instance. Traffic comes into the internet gateway, it translates it to the private IP address. The instance receives the traffic on the private IP. So the internet gateway does manage the IP addresses, but it doesn't come with the public IP addresses assigned. You attach them to the instance and it manages it for them. So that's not quite correct. Number 3, you cannot have a VPC with both an internet gateway and a virtual private network gateway.
Interesting.
Actually, I'm not sure. There's a thing called a virtual private gateway which you use to connect to VPN, but I think they're trying to trick us here with a virtual private. If it did say if it did say virtual private gateway, you can have both an internet gateway and a virtual private gateway, so it would be wrong. But I know that virtual private network gateway doesn't exist, so this one is wrong for 2 reasons.
A bit tricky.
And luckily no one voted for this one. A lot of people said number 4. Let's see. An internet gateway is needed if you want to connect to AWS servers outside of the VPC. Okay. So this is quite important. In your VPC, your EC2 instance is running, if you want to talk to an AWS service like S3, S3 lives on the internet. So to talk to S3, you actually have to get out to the outside world through an internet gateway to talk to S3. If you don't want to do that, you have to create something called a VPC endpoint.
Okay.
And a VPC endpoint sort of punches through your VPC out to a service, but you have to do that by service basis. So number 4 is actually correct.
You're going to go with number 4. Yep. Let's have a quick check on our polls. We're split between 2 and 4, but most going for 4.
I'm glad they
Let's
agree with me.
check out the answer. Number
And
4 it is, John.
Okay,
Happy with that?
very good.
All
Any
right.
questions out there? No one's got questions for us?
Not at the minute, John.
We are
Please do
live.
keep them
We are
coming.
live from Uluru. Uluru is a large rock in the middle of Australia. We are broadcasting to you from Australia.
That I have still not been in my 10
Haven't
years
been
in
there.
Australia,
So
John.
it's very sacred
Yeah.
to the Aboriginal people. You go out to Alice Springs, very dry town. You go out and visit Uluru. You can walk around it, and some very interesting hand paintings and things there as well. So come visit Uluru.
Got to get my kids over there. All right, moving on to EBS specific. Yeah?
Yeah.
You need to take a snapshot of an Amazon block store volume. How long will the volume be unavailable?
Ooh, so Elastic Block Store. So Elastic Block Store, our persistent disk volume where you can store data. A snapshot takes a copy of that disk volume. Think of it as a backup. So you
Okay.
can later on go and say, restore
Yeah,
my
that's a good way to
snapshot
think
to a
about it.
volume. Really great. Please do take backups. So
Another top tip of the day, is that, John?
take backups. Take many backups. Let's see. Number 1 depends on the.
100%, just a quick check on the poll, because it's quite interesting. Already 100% on number 2, John.
I'm going to skip
So let's
number 2.
miss number
then.
2.
Let's miss number 2. Number 1 depends on the provisioned size of the volume. So if you take a snapshot, there's magic that happens in the back end of EBS, and it doesn't matter how much data you've got there. It sort of remembers what's on the disk at the time, and the volume does not affect the time of the snapshot. So number 1 is not correct. Number 3 depends on the amount of data stored in the volume is really the same thing. The difference is provision size means as soon as you create a disk of 1 terabyte, it provisions terabyte. Number 3 is saying depends on the amount of data I've stored on there, and for the same reason that is incorrect.
Okay.
Number 4 depends on whether the attached instance is an EBS optimized instance. So
Interesting.
EBS disk volumes are behind the scenes network attached.
Yeah.
And if you have really fast provisioned IOPS EBS volumes, you can chew up a lot of that network bandwidth. So if you've got a lot of very fast volumes, we recommend you use an EBS optimized volume, which means it guarantees the throughput speed that you can get to that instance.
Okay.
So it doesn't affect snapshot speed, however. So I'm liking whatever number 2 is. The volume will be available immediately, correct. Snapshots do not make the volume unavailable. They might slightly slow down the disk performance while the snapshot is happening, but the disk remains available all the time. So I'm also
Which is
going
what
for
we're looking for.
number 2.
All right, let's close that poll and check our answer. Number 2, it is John. Thank
Beautiful.
you very much. Now, next question, having a look at SQS. You are working with your application development team and have created an Amazon Simple Queue service, standard queue. Your developers are complaining that messages are being processed more than once. What can you do to limit or stop this behavior, John?
Okay, so Amazon SQS is a service where you send it a message,
Yep.
it remembers the message, and then you say, give me the message. And it's highly scalable. You can send thousands, millions of messages to it, and
Wow.
it remembers. So in fact, this was the very first service that was introduced at AWS. And everyone said,
The
why?
first ever service.
First ever service back in 2006. And people said, why are you giving us a queuing service? There's nothing to queue. But we knew this was going to be a vital service for using with cloud services. Followed slightly later by S3.
Okay.
So SQS sends message, and it is true. When you retrieve a message from SQS, you connect to one of many servers.
Okay.
And it is possible that as you're grabbing that message and it marks it as taken, another program you're running on another machine might connect to SQS on a different server and grab exactly the same message. It doesn't happen often, it's very rare, but we do warn people that it is what's called eventually consistent. So
Okay.
the data might take a bit of time to propagate. So unfortunately, it is true that you can get the same message out. In the past, what we used to do is recommend that people, number 1 actually, have the application, and the developers make their application idempotent. And this means you check, have I processed record number 1, have I processed
Yep.
record number 2, a lot of overhead. However, I see that number 2 mentions a first in, first out queue, otherwise known as a FIFO queue. And one of the features of FIFO is that when you ask for a message, it gives it in the order it was created. But another feature we put into a FIFO queue was making sure the same message is not received twice.
Okay.
There's a limit on the speed that you can get them out, but we make sure that you don't get the same message more than twice. So I'm liking that one. Number 3, increase the visibility timeout on the queue. When you retrieve a message from a queue and you want to process it. So let's say you have grabbed a message and you are processing it. And I'm another worker and I want to go to the queue and grab a message. I don't want to grab your message because you're working on it. But
Yep.
I don't want to have that message deleted off the queue because you might fail while processing that. Your machine might fail, your code might have an error, and that message would be lost forever. So the message is marked as invisible.
Yep.
It would be bad if you disappeared. What happens is there's a thing called a visibility timeout, that if you don't respond to that message after a certain amount of time, it reappears on the queue, and something else can grab it. However, that I don't think has anything to do with a message. Well, it does. It could reappear on the queue and be processed again later, but that's only because it failed to be processed the first time.
Place,
so I don't count that as processed more than once. So sort of, but not quite.
So a few tricky little answers here, John.
4, adjust the size of the EC2 fleet. So I don't know what fleet they're talking about. SQS is a fully managed service. It might be referring to the fleet that you are using to connect to SQS. But if anything, having a larger fleet might cause this to happen more often because you're pulling more messages. Having a smaller fleet might mean you can't process as many messages. So I don't particularly like this.
Okay.
Just looking in chat. Oh, people are asking for a job at AWS. That's fantastic. If you pay attention to all these questions, you'll probably have a better chance of getting a job at AWS, wouldn't you think?
And please feel free to check out the website at careers as well, if you are interested.
So
back to the answer, John. What are we thinking for
I'm
SQS?
liking FIFO.
Limit or stop?
FIFO FUM, I'm liking FIFO. Number 2.
And on the poll, most people are going for 2, but we got a couple of people going for number 3 as well, John.
Number 3, as I said, a message might be processed more than once because it became invisible and disappeared. So I could understand that one. What was the right answer?
Let's check it out, shall we?
Okay, so I can justify my answer, but I could also vaguely justify the timeout thing as well. But number 2 refers to accidentally processing more than once. So yeah, pretty good.
Fantastic. Last question of the day, everyone. Please feel free to get all your votes in for question 8, and this time we're looking at CloudWatch. You have misconfigured an Amazon EC2 instance's clock and are sending data to Amazon CloudWatch via the API. Because of the misconfiguration, logs are being sent 60 minutes in the future.
In the future?
In the future, John. Which of the following is true?
I've just been watching Star Trek Discovery, and it has a time-traveling alien from the future. So maybe they've been watching Star Trek when they've been doing this. So that's
I
interesting.
think everyone was watching a different show yesterday, John. Just
time shifting, it can do it to you as well. Doctor Who is good too. Let's see. So an EC2 instance's clock is misconfigured, and it's sending data to CloudWatch. So we've mentioned before. Do you say data or data?
I don't know. What did I say?
I don't know what you say. I sometimes put the data in the database. Commander data, Star Trek. Everything's related. So let's see. EC2 is sending data to Amazon CloudWatch. There's 2 ways you can do this actually. When you send data to CloudWatch, you can either give it a timestamp and say this data point relates to this particular microsecond.
Okay.
Or you can just say my CPU utilization is 20%, and CloudWatch will automatically timestamp it. And the reason you might want the first option is you might be loading files from historical information and wanting to load in CloudWatch, so it's not now.
So sounding like a pretty good answer, but let's check in on
I haven't said
the
which answer yet. I've just been looking at the question. So and let's have a look at the answers. People are saying number 1. What are they saying? Amazon CloudWatch will process the data, so they have no problems with it coming from the future. Okay. Number 2, it's not possible to send data from the future. All the science fiction shows disagree, but I like that. Not possible to send data from the future. Actually, if you look in the documentation for CloudWatch, it says that you can send data from 14 days in the past up to 2 hours in the future. And the reason for that is you can load historical data, but there can also be clock drift. Okay. So they don't stop you from doing the future at all, but they've got to say how long is the future, and it is 2 hours. Now, normally, we don't try and make you remember little details like this.
But in this instance, it'd be pretty
useful.
useful.
From the future is handy. So having a look here, so it's not possible to send data from future. I disagree with number 2. 3, it's not possible to send data manually. I just said you can, so that's not the case. Agents cannot send data for more than 60 minutes in the future. It is actually 2 hours. So in this case, we do want you to know that the 2 hours is the future time span, and there's a longer time span before. Yep. So my Star Trek answer is number 1. I'm agreeing with lots of people out there.
A couple of comments on the chat, John.
Oh, what have we got there? Only matters what the config agent, I think, not the EC2 instance, just like DB comms. Yeah, so some time drifts. I agree with the time drift comment. That, in fact, I was in a company one time and they hired a security expert, And the very first thing the security expert did was put in a time server. And the reason for that is, as a security person, you want to look at log files in lots of different machines. And if they all have clock drift, then it's very hard to synchronize your log files between all the machines.
Okay.
So time accuracy is the first thing you should do when securing lots of systems. So clock drift is dangerous.
So we're going with number one?
Number one.
Let's check, shall we?
Number one. It will process the data because it's only 60 minutes out.
Fantastic. So that concludes our questions for today, everyone. Please remember that we've been using the official study guide for AWS Certified SysOps Administrator today from wiley.com, also available at amazon.com. So, John, last week we had a bit of an exam tip of the week from Sander, from our special guest last week. Would you mind doing the same for us this week?
Are you saying it is now time for, can I do the button?
Yes, you can do the button.
Time
John.
for the tip of the week.
Thanks for that.
I've always wanted to do that.
Are you ready?
Okay, a tip of the week. So what is good for doing exams? My tip is RTFM. Basically, read the manuals. I went to a talk one time by a very good solutions architect at AWS, Dean Samuels. You might know Dean.
Yeah.
He was in Sydney when I started AWS. He's now running solutions architecture in Hong Kong. And I was amazed at all the stuff he was saying. It's like, how does he know this? How does he know that you can go do 2 hours in the future and that sort of thing?
Yep.
And I was just blown away by his knowledge. And then I started reading the manuals, and guess what? It's all in there. So it's amazing how much information is in the manuals. So these certification guides will give you a summary of all the knowledge. So if you haven't read the manuals, or if you've read the manuals and you want a reminder of what's there, then it's in the guide.
Fantastic.
But read the documentation. Now, I don't mean read every page. It's hundreds of pages big.
Yeah.
But download it, scroll through it, look at the pretty pictures, look at the headings that are of interest, look at the bold text, and that'll give you a lot of information that's out there. And you know, you're doing a certification not to prove I've passed the exam, but to prove you do have AWS knowledge. So read the manuals.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us
Excellent.
today, John. Thank you for joining us online. We will see you not next week, because we will all be prepping for Sydney Summit the week after, and we'll be running 6 shows live at Sydney Summit. So please join us then. And then every week, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Sydney time, post Sydney Summit.
Just answering Yakakoka's question, the manuals, yes, the documentation manuals, you'll typically find either a developer guide or a user guide that is called there, and have a read through them, and not the API manuals, they're too long. So go for it.
Fantastic.
See you online again.
Thanks, John. Thanks,
Bye-bye,
everyone.
everyone.